My friend and fellow author Blair Lynn remembers the moment the floor dropped out beneath her. What followed were panic attacks, ER visits, and waves of anxiety so intense they left her trembling, breathless, and afraid she might die. As a Christian, she knew she should cast her cares on God, but she didn't know how. In the depths of fear and discouragement, simple answers and spiritual cliches fell flat. There was no quick fix, no bypassing the valley. In Made to Tremble, Blair shares how she learned to walk with God through her anxiety, not around it. With scripture, story, and raw honesty, she shows what it means to embrace our weakness, not as failure, but as the place where God meets us most tenderly. This is a book for anyone who feels overwhelmed, afraid, or unsure if faith can hold in the storm. Through Blair's story, discover the peace of God and a deeper awe of the God of peace. Get your copy at madetotremble.com. The Sing hymnal, from award-winning hymn writers Keith and Kristen Getty, is a rich collection of classic and contemporary hymns created to deepen worship, foster unity in the church, and proclaim the hope that we have in Christ. Alongside beloved hymns, you'll also find psalms paired with songs, liturgical readings, and helpful indices, making this hymnal a lasting resource for families and congregations alike. Pick up your copy wherever books are sold, or get 30% off at crossway.org/Getty hymnal with a free Crossway Plus account. You're listening to Confronting Christianity, a podcast of Training the Church.
She made it very clear that while I am on the friendship horizon, my ship has not yet arrived in the friendship port of Rebecca McLaughlin.
If there's one type of sexual sinner, if there's one kind of sexuality for whom Jesus isn't good news, he's not good news for any of us. The prize isn't that you get even better sex further down the road if you follow the Christian sexual ethic now. The prize isn't that, hey, Christianity can make you straighter and happier than you can ever imagine. That the prize is you get Jesus.
This is Kyle Worley, and I'm joined by my co-host, Rebecca McLaughlin, and we are also joined by author, pastor, speaker, general Renaissance man, and most importantly, our mutual friend, Sam Allberry. Sam, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm going to look up Renaissance man and see if that's a good thing.
I think
brother is what I was going to go for.
Oh,
pastor, author, speaker, brother.
Mm-hmm. That's better. Okay, hold on. Let me try it again. No.
It's too late.
No, but I do feel outnumbered here for the first time. I feel outnumbered. I feel like I'm supposed to come in with my best British accent. Should I try that?
Nobody deserved that, Kyle.
It's true. It's true. I'm reading Harry Potter, the first one, to my daughter right now.
So
and
fun.
My wife, a secret about her is that she is actually incredibly good with accents. And that's been verified by people who hold those accents. So it's not me, somebody who's incredibly bad at them, verifying it, but she's really good at it. And so my daughter knows that this is set in Britain and wants me to do the accent regularly. And it is a train wreck. It is horrible. It's bad. And she lets me know it immediately.
Good. So she's young enough to know what an English accent should sound like then.
Yes, because she's heard it enough on shows like Peppa the Pig and other shows. I
think he means Peppa Pig.
Yes, I think so.
Wait, is it not Peppa the Pig?
Kyle, can I share my piece of Harry Potter audiobook trivia?
Yes, please.
So the guy who recorded the audiobooks, I think it was Stephen Fry. Sam, does that sound about right?
That's correct, yeah.
Apparently, as he was recording them, so they were being recorded as J.K. Rowling was writing the books. And in the first book, he really struggled with the sentence, Harry pocketed it. Like he had to do multiple takes. He just couldn't get his mouth around it. So he calls J.K. Rowling and he says, is it okay if I say Harry put it in his pocket? She said, absolutely not. And then in every single future book, she made sure that the expression Harry pocketed it was in there just to irritate him.
Really?
So look out for that. Yes, look out when you're reading Harry Potter out loud.
I did not know that. I did not know that. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking that out. Surprisingly, we did not bring Sam on for Rebecca and I to talk about Harry Potter around him. We've brought Sam on because we've been looking for an excuse to bring Sam on from the very beginning. B, we literally did an episode titled after a book that Sam had just published in season 1 and did not have him on. And that we felt very bad about that after the fact. And then, but C, most importantly, because there's no one better to come on to talk with us through this question today than Sam Allberry. Sam, hey, thank you for making time for us.
It's a joy. It's lovely to see you both.
Okay, so Sam, in March, there's a new edition of Is God Anti-Gay releasing. And you just told me before we jumped on, it's been a decade since the first edition came out. Is that right?
Yeah, so Is God Anti-Gay came out in 2013. And it was a book I never thought I would ever finish, not because it's so, monumentally long. It's very, very short. But it was such a difficult thing to write on for lots of reasons, personal reasons and just cultural reasons. So I was very relieved when it eventually did see the light of day. And last year, I suddenly realized it's going to be 10 years old. And so much has changed since then that I decided it really did need to be refitted, redecorated, restructured, rewritten in places, so that I hope it can serve the sort of cultural time we're in right now.
Yeah.
Sam, when you say so much has changed, do you mean your theology, the scriptures? Tell us what's changed and tell us what hasn't changed.
Yeah, what has changed is the culture around us. When I wrote that book, gay marriage was not yet a legal thing in the UK or the US. So that already makes it feel like it's from a different, era. The questions people were asking were very different 10 years ago to the questions they're asking now. Some of the language has changed within the culture. And a lot has changed within the Christian world as well. The way we were broadly responding to this topic, even within the sort of evangelical world 10 years ago, is very different to how a lot of people are thinking now. What hasn't changed is the good news of the gospel. What hasn't changed is Jesus and what he has for all of us, and not least for people wrestling with their sexuality. So the good news hasn't changed. It's, if anything, it just gets better the more you walk in it and understand it and reflect on it. But I really wanted to try and make that good news as accessible as possible to where we are right now. And the other thing I found over the past decade is I initially wrote the book primarily for Christians and kept hearing of non-Christians who'd been reading it and thankfully being helped by it in many cases. But I thought, well, okay, if it's going to be given to people who wouldn't call themselves Christians, again, I'll try and reflect that in the way that I write, make it more accessible, I hope, for someone who doesn't have any Christian background.
Yeah. Sam, I'd be curious, a decade ago, when the first one is coming out, the first edition, was there any, looking at now what's transpired, would you say, it's kind of gone like maybe I would have thought it would at a cultural level, even among Christian dialogue level? Would you say that's probably how I would have anticipated this playing out? Because like you said, so many things have been different. And I'm not asking whether or not you could have, looked into the future or prophesied these things, but just generally when you wrote it, did you feel like, okay, this is going to be we're not going to stop talking about this over the next 10 years. And this is certainly not going to be the thing that ends the conversation. I'm just trying to get us moving in the necessary direction. Has it unfolded in a way that you thought it might?
I think yes and no. I think culturally, I never thought this is going to be gone in 5 years. And, it's such a big part of life. It's going to remain an issue for many, many years to come. I was fairly sure of that. And I think I would have said, at the time, I could sort of see where culture was trending in terms of accepting gay marriage. That was looking like it was going to be a very inevitable process, even back in 2013. I think the thing that maybe has surprised me is what has sort of happened in the Christian world since then, particularly among Bible-believing Christians. And as the culture has moved in a more progressive direction, I've been surprised and saddened at how much of the Christian networks I've been part of have become more belligerent on this, more angry. So rather than leaning more into the very posture of Christ himself, it feels as though people are sort of trying to, I don't know what they're trying to do, but there just seems to be a lot of anger from the church at the very time where we should be expressing the truth in love.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about this issue as something that will or won't be a conversation in coming years. How long will this be around? Sort of helped to remember it's actually been around for at least 2,000 years. The ways that Christian sexual ethics is at odds with the sexual ethics of the world, I think is always going to look different depending on our cultural context, depending on our time. But that there'll always be that clash, and sometimes the clash is not between a church that's holding to Christian sexual ethics and a world that is sort of rampantly engaging in and enjoying and celebrating sex of all kinds. But sometimes it's the clash between Christian sexual ethics and a culture that doesn't love people who might, like you and me, Sam, who might be primarily attracted to folks of their same sex, and people who are trying to navigate that faithfully. I feel like you can err on both those sides, the embrace of sin, sexual sin on the one hand, and the cruelty, minimization, isolation, I guess, of brothers and sisters on the other. And I feel like we as Christians have made both those mistakes in the last century, the last 2 centuries, the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on Saturday speaking to a group of high school students about the topic of sexuality, and one of the things that we were discussing is how Jesus' teaching on marriage has always been countercultural. We feel the particular way it's countercultural in our own time and context, but it's never not been countercultural in one way or another. Throughout history in very different parts of the world, it's never just slotted in neatly. Which is reassuring, I think, for Christians who are sort of maybe perplexed about the ways in which it feels controversial now to believe what Jesus says on these things. But I hope for our friends who are not yet Christians, it's again, this is not, let's go back to the 1950s kind of American culture. Jesus has always been awkward. And that's part of what makes him compelling, because if Jesus really has come from outside of human culture, if he really has come from heaven, we would expect that what he says is not going to line up with any one time and place in human history. It's always going to sit awkwardly at any point. That's one of the evidences that he really has come from outside of human culture.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think, so maybe a listener at this point, maybe they clicked on this episode just because they saw the question, is God anti-gay, and thought, oh man, okay, I'm working through this, or I'm thinking through this personally, or there's somebody I'm discipling. Maybe somebody's listening to this is going, I've only experienced attraction to members of the same sex my entire life, and I'm struggling with that, or I'm thinking through that, or I hate what Christians have to say about sexuality. And so now they're listening to this episode and they don't know you, they don't know this book that came out 10 years ago. Let's just maybe tee it up this way. The book is a question. Is God anti-gay? If you and me, Sam, are 60 seconds in an elevator and you're wearing that shirt, you're wearing a shirt that said, is God anti-gay on it? And I go, well, is he? And we've got from floor 1 to floor 10 for you to give me the pitch before I walk out the door. What are you telling me? Like, what is the answer to that question that we've framed on this podcast in light of your book?
Just to give Sam a second to think about that, I want to point out that only an American would wear a T-shirt. Something like that. We Brits, it wouldn't even cross our minds to wear a T-shirt like that.
Really? Oh, man, that's crazy.
Merchandise opportunities right now.
We can do mugs.
Sam, go for it,
We can do
Sam.
mugs, throw pillows, blankets. I mean, this is American evangelicalism, Sam. We can put it on anything.
No, I mean, I have it obviously on a tattoo, but no, it's a very, I mean, that is the key question. I think my 60-second answer would be, if there's no hope for our gay friends, there's no hope for any of us. Because the fact is that the teaching of Jesus repeatedly shows us we're all in this thing together. All of us are fallen. All of us are broken in our sexuality. All of us have disordered desires when it comes to that part of life. And if there's one type of sexual sinner, if there's one kind of sexuality for whom Jesus isn't good news, he's not good news for any of us. Mm-hmm. So Jesus doesn't, he doesn't talk much about things like what we would call sexual orientation in our culture, not because, that wasn't an issue then, but because the real issue is whether you're attracted to the same sex, the other sex, both, neither, whatever it is, all of us need the same Jesus.
Yeah.
All of us need his forgiveness and grace. All of us need his presence and his love in our lives. So there's no reason a heterosexual person should be feeling spiritually smug about their heterosexuality, and no reason someone who's attracted to the same sex should be feeling as though they have less hope than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And I think it'd be fair to say that as that grace is received by every individual, regardless of the way they experience sexual desires, that as we receive that grace and salvation, grace that is readily available for us in Jesus, it's the same call to surrender all of our desires, regardless of what those desires might be, right? Like the invitation to surrender, I think sometimes the way, and really, I think, Sam, a lot of my exploration of this began with dealing with your book. I really can't tell the audience that first edition was this little gray book. It was so small, and yet the impact it had was colossal. Nobody had been speaking at kind of that wide a level in a way as helpful as Sam was when he wrote this little book. And I cannot commend it to you enough. And one of the things that began to crystallize for me is I would have answered the questions right on the quiz of Christian discipleship around like what God's call on all of us was regarding surrendering to the way of Jesus. I would have answered the questions right. But in my heart, I was still making some distinctions between some desires that were taboo and desires that were not taboo. And the way I was making those distinctions had very little to do with the way that Jesus was calling me or any of my neighbors to surrender those desires, and a lot more to do with how I experienced them in the life of the world. And I think that what became clear to me was that the call to surrender our sexual desires is not a call that is merely extended to one set of sexual desires. God is calling everyone to surrender all of their desires in consecration to God. Is that right? Am I saying it the right way?
I think you are, yes, because, every now and then someone will say to me, are you really saying Jesus is asking me to give him my sexuality? And my answer is often no, that it's much worse than that. He's asking you to give him your whole life. Your sexuality is too small a thing just to give Jesus on its own. He wants everything from all of us, which sounds unimaginably off-putting until you realize that Jesus is so unfathomably wonderfully good that actually we are so much better off giving everything to him. He's going to do it. These things are much better in his hands than in our hands. And he is presuming in that very call that he is worth those things in a way that nothing else in this world is. He is worth more than all the things we think we might want and think we could never leave him we can never leave behind for him. So there's an audacity in what Jesus says there, but it's, there's something about who we are as human beings that we will only ever be truly satisfied in Jesus. There's too much of a weightiness to us for anything in this world to really carry the full bulk of who we are as people made in God's image.
Yeah, I think building on that, Sam, a penny really dropped for me. And for those listeners who don't know either me or Sam, both of it, we have sort of at the most basic level the same testimony of having grown up, finding ourselves attracted to folks of our same sex, as followers of Jesus, being pretty clear that wasn't something that we can pursue as followers of Jesus, but definitely, and I think it's fair to say, were we not Christians, we would likely be respectively married to another woman and another man, is my guess. I think a penny really dropped for me, not instantly, but over a period of time, when it became clear to me from the scriptures that actually the very best that you and I could ever experience in a human sexual relationship is designed to be appointed to Jesus' love for us. Mm-hmm. That it's not even just that we kind of give this thing up in order, out of devotion to Jesus, which we do, but that even at its very best, the thing that we might have pursued would only have ever been a signpost to something much greater. And I think for me, sort of understanding a little bit more of the gospel logic behind Christian sexual ethics, that it's not just something designed to sort of stop us doing things that might be fun, or stop us engaging in relationships of love. I think one of the things that's hard, and I'm curious for your experience with this, but talking with both with non-Christians and with progressive folk who identify as Christians and are also in same-sex sexual relationships or marriages, is them saying, it's not primarily about the sex. I'm looking for or I'm enjoying a intimate, loving relationship with another man or with another woman. How could you sort of just reduce it down to the sex? I don't think we're trying to reduce it down to sex. I think we're trying to say, actually, all the sort of heart, body, mind, soul kind of things that we could experience in a romantic relationship with somebody else, male or female, at their very best, can only ever be an echo of Jesus' love for us.
Yeah. And I think I was beginning to get that when I wrote the first edition, and that's something I've really come to understand more and more in the past 10 years, is just how true that is. When Jesus announces himself as the bridegroom, there is so much bound up in that. That is the big clue to all of this. And actually, Rebecca, your work on, again, the forms of love that are available to us that are nothing to do with a romantic or sexual relationship, that has really helped as well. You gave me a sneaky peek of your upcoming book manuscript on friendship, and that is, I think, going to be one of the most significant books for this coming decade. And I'm mentioning it now because I know you've been a bit unsure of it, and this way now you have to publish it.
I'm still very unsure of it.
If you're unsure of it, just give it to me and I'll publish it in my name, because it's absolutely wonderful.
Fantastic.
To change a few pronouns, but
I'm also glad that you've mentioned it, because I have not gotten advanced sneaky peek, as you have said. So now I have something that I can request of Rebecca.
I think she did give it to her friends, but anyway.
No, listen. I gave it to my best friend Rachel and to my dear brother Sam. I knew from Rachel I get mostly critique, and Sam gave me mostly encouragement, so I was able to continue.
I'm the good cop.
Right? Well, and for the record, Sam, Rebecca and I got to spend some time together a month or so back, and she made it very clear that while I am on the friendship horizon, my ship has not yet arrived in the friendship port of Rebecca McLaughlin, and so I am. Yes, you did. You told me that you see the faint glimmer of friendship possible for us. Yeah, well, something in so many words. I'm sure you said it in a much kinder, more understated British way, but I wasn't entirely chuffed to bits to hear it.
Good English phrase there.
You see what I did there? Hey, I literally looked them up on Google before I jumped on here today. So I've got a whole bank of them that I'm going to be throwing in.
If there is anyone involved in reconciliation, please do get in touch with this podcast. And
Sam, you did say something a moment ago that I want to circle back on. That I know what you mean, and I think that many listeners will know what you mean. But I want to just kind of double down on it, make sure that as we're talking through it, that we don't rush past it. You said our sexuality is so small a thing, or it's too small a thing. Now, I think that the three of us know that what you're saying is true. In the wider conversation, sexuality does not feel or appear in people's personal experience. It's not often the case that sexuality feels like a small part of their life. And in the wider conversation, it certainly doesn't appear that sexuality is treated as just another piece. It seems like it's like the whole show. Now, there's a personal dimension to that, to where we experience our sexual desires, whatever they may be, in a very intimate, personal, and direct way that is kind of at the most intersecting vulnerabilities of our life. So there's that personal experience. Then that's kind of ensconced in a much wider conversation, even if it is conceptual, that no, you like are your sexuality. So it's then like that personal experience is then like ratified typically in what we see, what we hear, what we watch, what we're receiving kind of from external inputs. So maybe somebody heard you say your sexuality is too small a thing, and they're going, it doesn't feel that way. And most everybody else outside of you has told me it's not so small a thing. It is like the main thing. So what would you say to that person if they're saying that doesn't line up with my personal experience internally, nor does it line up with what I hear from other people in the world?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I was saying it's too small a thing to think, that's the only part of us Jesus is interested in. I would say it is too small a thing to make your core identity. It is deeply personal. It touches on so many areas of life. So it's not insignificant. It's not small, but there's so much more to who we are as human beings than merely the kind of sexual desires we have. And we live in a cultural time where the cultural furniture is arranged in such a way that we make those desires the sort of emblem of who we are. They speak to us of the sort of all that we are deepest in our being. And I just think actually that the Bible gives us a far richer view of what it means to be a human being made in God's image. And sexuality is a very significant part of that, but it isn't given star billing. And if we make it the sort of the big deal of who we are in our life, actually it won't fit us well as a core identity, because actually there's just too much more to us than just our sexuality. There's a lovely guy I know, I guess he's 17, 18, something like that. He left his Christian home, went to live with some non-Christians. He came out online. Lots of, as you would expect, lots of people kind of affirming him, congratulating him and celebrating him for making that step. I was living with very progressive friends and the whole thing. But a few months later, it dawned on him that the only thing they were affirming in him was his sexuality. They weren't interested in the rest of him. And he was wanting to be accepted for all of who he felt he was, and not merely the sexuality part. And it was as if it was the sexuality that was the only point of interest and affirmation and celebration in people around him. And he was looking for much more than that.
Yeah.
I've been chatting with him throughout that entire process. And part of my heart for him is to try and show him actually, firstly, he's not going to lose my friendship, whatever he's posting publicly, whether that's for Christianity or against it. But secondly, I see him as, I hope, through the Bible lens of all that there is that makes him him. And his sexuality is one aspect of his life and his experience, but it's not the thing in him I most, there's so much more to him than just that. But he felt the sort of the cultural response to his coming out initially was hugely uplifting and so on, but he sort of found it longer term a bit lacking because it was diminishing him. That won't be everyone's experience, but it was telling to me that was his experience. And it actually led him back to the church.
One of the things I often quote you on, Sam, and I don't know if I get the words exactly verbatim.
Well, you'll improve them if you don't.
But your claim, which I think is a profoundly biblical claim, that if somebody leaves a gay relationship in order to become a Christian, they should find more love, not less. And I think a big piece of what we need to rethink, reshape, re-biblicalize, if that's a word, which it isn't, but you know what I mean, as we think about sexual ethics, is actually Christian community ethics.
Yeah.
Because if we buy into what our culture says, which is that real intimacy happens in sexual and romantic relationships, and so if you're sort of barred from that kind of relationship for whatever reason, then you're just missing out. There's no real love for you. Or like maybe parent-child relationships, but often the two go hand in hand. It's a profoundly unbiblical way of thinking and operating. And instead, if we can reclaim the true kind of sibling family love that we're called to in the scriptures, that's sort of demanded of us, that's expected of us, that's demonstrated for us in the New Testament, then we're not going to be leaving, folks within the church feeling lonely, and we're not going to be inviting people outside the church to leave all the love they have to come to a place where they're not really known and not really wanted. I think we need to make it true what the Bible says and what you so often helpfully re-articulate, that we should be offering more love and not less.
Yeah, and the word I've started to make up is people should feel infamilied as they come into the life of a church. In a way, again, that makes them feel as though, okay, I don't have the same type of love that I may have had before I came to Christ in terms of that romantic and sexual love, but I have such a rich experience of love. And like you say, that hopefully they feel more known than they would have done otherwise. But if we're not attending to that, we're unpreaching the gospel that we think we're trying to communicate, and we won't have traction in our culture. What I'm longing for in my own church and in all of our churches is that the very culture that might well say, I really don't like what those guys believe at various points, will nevertheless feel so compelled by the presence of that family love within our fellowships, that itself will be non-ignorable. It will just be unanswerable. And that's what Jesus says. This is how people will know you are my disciples, by your love for one another.
Right.
So if we're not manifesting that love, we're not really living the truth that we think that we're proclaiming.
What do you do when it feels like your spiritual life is crumbling? When trusted leaders fail, doubts rise, grief hits, and you don't know what to believe in anymore? In her new book, Someone to Believe In, Embracing the Saviour Who Stays the Same When Everything Else Changes, author and Bible teacher Courtney Reisig helps us to see Jesus' unshakable character. If you're not sure whether you believe in Jesus yet, or if your faith feels unsteady in the face of grieving, burnout, or disillusionment, this book invites you to encounter Jesus as the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Get your copy of Someone to Believe In today at someonetobelievein.com.
I want to shift directions here as we look to close out our conversation and maybe kind of broaden it out. The podcast is titled Confronting Christianity. And so often where Christians are confronted with this is more within the scope of the public square or the wider cultural conversation. And so for the three of us just to consider for a moment, one of the things that I hear often, and I'm sure you've heard as well, and I'd be curious to hear what the two of you think about this and to talk about it. Some suggest either progressive Christians that have taken an affirming posture towards same-sex relationships or just the wider culture, that we might look back on what we call conservative Christian sexual ethics in the future, like we look back on people who held unbiblical or oppressive views of women or other races in the past. That, like, from our vantage point, we think, well, we're being faithful, but maybe 50, 60, 100 years from now, much like we look back on some of the unbiblical or prejudiced or bigoted views of women or people from other races in the past, that we'll look back on our views now and be like, wow, we were falling into the same mistake. Like a dog returns to their own vomit. We did it again with a different set of issues. Are we in danger of that? Like when we think about Christian sexual ethics, is this the moment where we're going to look back and be like, wow, just like so many of those Christians during the civil rights movement were willing to say, not yet, or we're going to hold the line, or we got to keep these values. Are we in danger of falling into the same pit as these issues are kind of move forward, or as we look to engage them faithfully?
I think in a sense we are. We're always in danger of confusing our own homegrown cultural values with Christianity. And those examples to me are just a reminder of what happens when you leave the teaching of Jesus. And that is what was happening there. And so that makes me want to cling ever more closely to the teachings of Jesus in the area of sexuality, and to keep checking myself. Am I actually following the teaching of Jesus? Am I reading things into it? I never want to assume I've got it all right, which is why we cross-check our own reading with that of people from other times and cultures and places from our own. That's a good way of checking our own cultural bias. But those very examples from church history make me want to think, okay, I've got to go where Jesus goes on these things, even if it's unpopular now.
Yeah.
So I think the arguments from church history are actually an argument in favor of that, I guess we call it traditional understanding of Christian sexuality. And I think it's our progressive friends who are actually following the same pattern by sort of trying to dilute the teaching of Christianity with something that feels so non-negotiable within our own particular culture.
I think that right there is a really strong point, Sam, what you just said, because I do think that we look back on history, and I'm thinking, I think at least in the American context, mature audience will be listening, but really anywhere throughout the global West, it's indisputable that we can look back on the last 200, 300, in America, 50, 60, 70 years, maybe 50 days, depending on what year we find ourselves in. And we can find some level of broadly nominal Christian values being used as the rubber stamp for something that is clearly unbiblical and is certainly not in the way of Christ. And when that appears to be the case at a cultural level, I think we often say, well, look at this very heightened, stringent form of Christianity that's being enforced, when oftentimes what's being displayed there is not a heightened form of Christian witness, it's a diluted form of the gospel.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a really strong point, Sam, that when we look back on those moments, what we're not seeing is a rigorous biblicism or a rigorous commitment to the way of Christ. We're seeing a very culturally conditioned, diluted version of that truth. And I think that when we think about communicating with conviction and with compassion, Christian sexual ethics, the goal isn't, well, we need to really ratchet up the gears to make this thing as hard as humanly possible, nor is the goal for us to dilute it down to make it as palatable as possible, but it's just to be faithful in all of the tensions that it presents.
And sorry, after you, Rebecca.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it's easy for people to caricature Jesus, actually, when it comes to sexual ethics, because, some people say, well, look at how incredibly gracious and welcoming and forgiving Jesus was of sexual sin, and look at how he was condemning of hypocritical, self-righteous religious people. And both of those things are absolutely true. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we need to look at the deathly seriousness with which Jesus treated sexual sin. Saying, you've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I say to you, anyone who's looked at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery. Like, it's not that he's loosening up the Old Testament sexual ethics, he's actually tightening them up. Mm. And the deep seriousness with which Jesus takes sexual sin of all kinds. People sometimes say that Jesus never said anything about same-sex sexual sin. I think that's a poor reading, actually, of the Gospels, the word, porneia, which seemed to refer to all kinds of sexual sin that was happening around in the Greco-Roman culture into which Jesus was speaking, and seeing his rigorous diagnosis of where that comes from, that kind of sin comes out of our hearts, and actually we would be better off, ripping out our eye than following our eyes into sexual sin. Better to rip out your eyes and go to heaven than follow your sexual sin and go to hell. But that ultimately the only escape for us is him. Yeah. There's no part of us we could rip off and actually deal with the problem of our hearts. So I think we just can often we can caricature Jesus one way or another and fail to see the tension that he brings to us around the seriousness of sin and his incredible grace and mercy and forgiveness.
That's right. Okay, let's do this. Let's end this way. All of us, in one way or another, as or alongside or with or to, have been engaging in ministry to people who experience same-sex attraction for some length of time. It's happened, whether in publishing or in pastoring and writing, speaking and teaching and care. As our audience is listening to this, whether they clicked on this episode because they want to know how to care and minister to somebody that they love who experiences same-sex attraction, or they're really just curious about the question at a big picture level, like they just genuinely don't know. Either they're a new follower of Jesus or they're somebody who's kind of looking into the faith, and this is a huge question for them, or there's somebody who is clicked on this antagonistically, meaning they really believe that they do not like what Jesus has to say about sexual ethics and sexual desires and surrendering all of our life to him. What would be your parting word? What would be your encouragement or exhortation for all of those people? And I know that's a wide cast of characters, but what is the good news of the gospel in light of the question, is God anti-gay? What's the hope?
At the risk of sounding like this is a sort of simplistic and crass kind of thing to say, the hope is Jesus. The prize is Jesus. The prize isn't that you get even better sex further down the road if you follow the Christian sexual ethic now. The prize isn't you get to fulfill your own deepest desires. The prize isn't that, hey, the Christianity can make you straighter and happier than you can ever imagine. That the prize is you get Jesus. Because as Rebecca said earlier, he is the one all of these things in their right place and even at their best are pointing to. He is the bridegroom. So if we get Jesus, we don't miss out. I mean, we don't get lots of other things in this world, but we don't ultimately miss out. That's the real win here. And I think the thing I've seen change in myself the most over the last maybe 20 years is I used to pray all the time that I would get married. 20 years down the road, I don't really mind because I have Jesus. And whether I end up being married or single or, any of those things actually just matters far less to me. It's not that those things are nothing, but they don't register enough, that if I have Jesus, it doesn't ultimately matter if I fulfill my sexuality. Because actually in a deeper way, I am fulfilling my sexuality by living in obedience to Jesus. I'm fulfilling my sexuality more by being obedient to Jesus as a single man than I would be if I was trying to satisfy my sexual desires in a same-sex partnership. One looks like it's fulfilling my sexuality, but actually if my sexuality is all ultimately about finding my truest satisfaction in Jesus, then I am fulfilling my sexuality. So he is the prize. So I just keep pressing into Jesus. If you're not a Christian, don't write him off before you've really understood what he's offering you. And if you are a Christian, keep pressing into him, even if it feels difficult at times, which it can often do. But there's just nothing greater in life to have than him.
It's good, Sam. I just want to commend Sam's book to the listeners. If you have not had a chance to pick up Is God Anti-Gay, I know that you will find it tremendously helpful and edifying and encouraging. And if you haven't had a chance, then March is a great time to do it with this next edition coming out. Sam, thank you for making time and spending some time with us today.
Thanks, brother.
It's so good to see you guys.
You as well. You can find Confronting Christianity on Instagram and Twitter. You can leave a review on iTunes, and in your review, include a question that you want us to explore in a future episode. We'll take those into consideration. Check out our sister shows, Knowing Faith, Family Discipleship Podcast, and the brand new Starting Place with Elizabeth Woodson. If you do not know Elizabeth Woodson, this is your opportunity to meet an incredible Bible teacher who is so skilled at explaining what Christians believe and why it matters. Truly, do not miss out on that show. If you want to find out some more about what we're doing at the Train the Church Podcast Network, you can go to trainthechurch.com/support. I'm going to tell you guys, I banked a lot of these British idioms that I did not play out today, and some of my favorite were faff. I never heard that before. Gobby, donkey's years, scrummy. So just I had to get them out there because I did log them on this Google Doc that I had over here. So
well, Carl, if it makes you feel better, you were faffing about before we pressed record on this episode, which was why I Jen Wilkins you and said, "Enough of the faff, Kyle. Let's get rolling."
Let's get rolling. Well, Bob's your uncle. We hope you enjoyed the discussion.
So bad.
We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Grace and peace.